$700,000. That's the floor. That's what it costs to keep a single Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer on station in the Gulf of Oman for 1 week. Fuel, maintenance, crew support, logistics. Before the ship fires a single weapon, before a single Iranian fast boat turns toward it in the dark. At the high end of the operating estimate, that number climbs past $1 million. Per week, per hull. And right now, the United States Navy has more than one hull parked in those waters. In the spring of 2026, Navy budget officials delivered a warning to Congress that got almost no coverage outside defense trade publications. The service's operations and maintenance accounts, the funds that pay for exactly this kind of sustained forward presence, could run critically short by July. Not because the Navy asked for too little, because the pace of operations, the sheer hourly burn of keeping warships between Iran and the tanker lanes, is eating through the budget faster than the fiscal year was designed to absorb. That's the number nobody wants to say out loud in Washington. Not the cost of a war, the cost of preventing one. Here's where this story gets strange. The destroyer isn't being worn down by enemy fire. It's being worn down by presence, by the act of simply being there day after day between the threat and the target. The Arleigh Burke-class is one of the most capable surface combatants ever built, a ship designed to project power indefinitely. And yet the thing it's projecting against costs almost nothing to attempt. A Shahed 136 one-way attack drone runs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 to produce. The interceptor the destroyer fires back, an SM-2 or SM-6, costs between $2 and $4 million. The exchange ratio isn't a rounding error. It's the entire strategic problem. So the question this patrol raises isn't tactical, it's financial. When the cheaper move is to wait you out, to keep launching cheap drones and cheap fast boats until the budget hollows from the inside, does forward presence still deter, or does it just spend? Stay with this, because the answer isn't obvious, and it cuts both ways. To understand how the Navy ended up here, you have to go back further than the current tension. The logic of forward presence in the Persian Gulf isn't new. It was codified after the tanker war of the 1980s, when the Reagan administration began escorting Kuwaiti oil tankers through the strait under Operation Earnest Will. The principle was simple. American warships in the water meant that any attack on commercial shipping was an attack on American credibility. Deterrence through visibility. That logic held for decades because the cost of challenging it was prohibitive. Iran's Navy could harass, but a confrontation with an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer or a carrier strike group was a confrontation Iran couldn't survive conventionally. The asymmetry ran in Washington's favor. American technology was expensive, but so was any Iranian attempt to match it. Then the drone changed the arithmetic. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGs, began investing seriously in one-way attack drones in the early 2010s. The Shahed 136 isn't a precision weapon in the traditional sense. It's a loitering munition, essentially a flying bomb that navigates to a GPS coordinate and impacts. Its airframe is crude by American standards. Its guidance is basic. Its warhead is small, but its unit cost is somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000. It can be produced in very large numbers, and it doesn't require a trained pilot. IRGC commanders understood early that the way to stress an expensive air defense system is to overwhelm it with cheap threats that cost less to produce than the interceptors cost to fire. By 2022 and 2023, the world had seen what this looked like in practice in Ukraine, where Russian forces employed Iranian-supplied Shahed 136 drones against Ukrainian infrastructure at a scale that forced Western air defense systems to burn through expensive interceptors against targets that cost almost nothing. The lesson wasn't lost on naval planners. The same exchange ratio that was bankrupting Ukrainian air defense budgets was applicable, in principle, to any American surface combatant operating within drone range of the Iranian coast. Esmail Khani, the commander of the Irgzi Quds force who took over after Qasem Soleimani was killed in 2020, has been explicit about the layered nature of Iran's asymmetric strategy. It isn't designed to defeat the United States Navy in a conventional engagement. It's designed to make the cost of American presence so persistent and so cumulative that political support for that presence erodes before any decisive battle is ever fought. In Washington, Donald Trump came back to the presidency in January 2025 with a strategy toward Iran that combined maximum economic pressure with explicit military threat. Pete Hegseth, confirmed as Secretary of Defense, was tasked with rebuilding what the administration described as a posture of deterrence through strength. The carrier USS Gerald Ford and its strike group were forward deployed. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers were positioned across the Gulf of Oman and the northern Arabian Sea. The message was deliberate. America is here, America is watching, and America will respond. What the message didn't address was the burn rate. The Navy's operating budget is structured around a peacetime tempo. Sustained high-tempo operations, the kind where destroyers are on station continuously, where flight operations run every day, where readiness requirements demand constant maintenance, consume funds at a rate the base budget was never designed to sustain indefinitely. Defense officials who track these accounts began flagging in early 2026 that the operations and maintenance line was running significantly ahead of projection, not because of combat damage, because of presence. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface until you look at the numbers directly. The Navy isn't at war with Iran. No shots have been fired in a formal sense that would trigger emergency supplemental appropriations from Congress. The ships are simply deployed, doing exactly what they're supposed to do: patrolling, intercepting, deterring. And that routine, sustained, technically peaceful activity is what's emptying the account. The warning that operations funding could run short by July 2026 wasn't a crisis declaration. It was a planning signal, the kind of quiet institutional alert that precedes a formal request for emergency transfer authority or a supplemental appropriations request to Congress. But the timing matters. July is mid-fiscal year. Running critically short on operations funding in July means either pulling ships back, reducing patrol tempo, or going to Congress for money in an election-adjacent political environment where defense spending is already contested. None of those options is clean. Now walk through the patrol log of a single destroyer. Call it USS Gravely, an Arleigh Burke flight IIA, hull DDG-107. The ship has been on station in the Gulf of Oman for 21 days. In that time, its 4 gas turbine engines have burned roughly 250 zillion gallons of F-76 naval distillate fuel. At current contract prices, that fuel alone runs to approximately $750,000. Add crew subsistence, consumable maintenance parts, aviation fuel for the MH-60R Seahawk helicopter operating off the fantail, and the communications and intelligence support costs allocated to the hull. And the weekly operating cost lands between $700,000 and just over $1,000. Over 21 days, USS Gravely has burned through somewhere between $2.1 million and $3 million just to exist in that patch of water. It hasn't fired a weapon. It hasn't intercepted a drone. It has deterred, or attempted to deter, by presence. Now multiply. The standard patrol configuration for the Gulf of Oman cordon in 2026 involves not one destroyer but a rotating group of 2 to 4 hulls, supplemented periodically by a cruiser and naval assets from partner nations operating under combined maritime forces. At 3 hulls simultaneously, the monthly burn rate for just the American surface combatants crosses $10 million. At 4 hulls, it approaches $16 million per month before any engagement. What's striking about this isn't the size of the numbers. Defense budgets are large and these figures aren't extraordinary by Pentagon standards. What's striking is the structural nature of the problem. The cost isn't triggered by combat. It's triggered by the logic of deterrence itself. You must be present to deter. Being present costs money by the hour. The threat you're deterring costs almost nothing to sustain on the other side. That gap doesn't close through better procurement or more efficient logistics. It's baked into the geometry of the situation. Now introduce the intercept costs. The SM-6, the Standard Missile 6, is the primary long-range air defense interceptor carried by Arleigh Burke-class destroyers operating in threat-elevated environments. It's a remarkable weapon. It can engage aircraft, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles in their terminal phase, and surface targets. Its range exceeds 130 nautical miles. Its seeker combines semi-active radar homing with terminal active radar, meaning it can engage without continuous ship illumination. Against a Shahed 136, it's phenomenally overqualified. It's also priced at approximately $4.3 million per round. The SM-2 Block I, the older standard range interceptor still carried in significant numbers, costs approximately $2.1 million per round. Both are manufactured by Raytheon Technologies, now RTX, under long-term contracts that the Navy has been struggling to accelerate given the pace of consumption in Allied inventories following the Ukraine conflict and the Red Sea operations of 2023 and 2024. Here's the math problem in its simplest form. An ARGC operator or a Houthi proxy launches a Shahed 36 toward a tanker or toward an American warship. The drone costs at maximum $50,000. The destroyer intercepts it with an SM-2. The interceptor costs $2.1 million. The exchange ratio is 42 to 1 against the defender, in dollar terms, on a single engagement. If the attacker launches 2 drones simultaneously and the defender fires 1 interceptor at each, the exchange is $4.2 million against $100,000. If the attacker launches 10 drones in a salvo designed to saturate the defense, a tactic that Doctrine has explicitly moved toward, and the Defender expends 10 interceptors. The engagement costs the attacker $500,000 and costs the defender $21 million to $43 million, depending on which interceptor was used. The attacker can do this again tomorrow. The defender has to reload. Reloading isn't a trivial problem. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries 90 to 96 vertical launch system cells, shared across SM-2, SM-6, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and ASROC anti-submarine rockets. Those cells cannot be reloaded at sea. The ship must return to a port with vertical launch reload capability, Diego Garcia, Bahrain's naval support activity, or a stateside facility, to have the cells replenished. The reload evolution takes days. During that time, the hull is off station. Going through the Navy's public testimony on VLS reload capacity, one detail keeps coming back. The United States currently has very limited at-sea reload capability for vertical launch systems. It's a gap that naval planners have flagged for more than a decade. The ship's designed to carry ammunition and reload surface combatants at sea. The T-8 dry cargo vessels and their successors don't have the cranes and handling systems required to reload VLS cells in open water. Every interceptor fired is a round that requires a port call to replace. So here's the second layer of the cost problem. The destroyer is burning money by being present. When it intercepts a threat, it burns money at an accelerating rate. And when its magazine is depleted, it must leave station to reload, which either thins the cordon or requires another hull to take its place, which is burning money at its own rate. The attacker's cost is the drone. The defender's cost is the patrol, the interceptor, the reload, and the rotation. All of that is before you count the tanker the destroyer is protecting. Now put a price on what's actually being defended. A very large crude carrier, a VLCC, carrying 2 million barrels of oil through the Gulf of Oman represents, at current market prices, somewhere between $140 million and $180 million worth of cargo. Its freight insurance, in a threat-elevated environment, runs to several $100,000 per transit. The tanker itself is worth $80 million to $120 million as an asset. These are significant numbers. The economic argument for protecting them is real. But here's the complication that rarely gets discussed in the strategic literature. The tanker doesn't have to transit on any particular schedule. If the threat environment makes a transit genuinely dangerous, the tanker can wait at anchor. Anchor time costs the owner crew rations and port fees, maybe $50,000 to $100,000 a week for a large vessel sitting idle. Compare that to the cost of the cordon holding the lane open for it. The destroyer is burning $700,000 to $1,000 Zone a week to enable a commercial transit that the commercial operator could delay for a fraction of that cost. This isn't an argument that the Navy should step aside. The strategic logic of free navigation runs deeper than any individual cargo manifest. If American warships can't keep the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman open, the signal sent to every adversary on every waterway is immediate and irreversible. The deterrence value is systemic, not transactional. But the cost asymmetry is real, and it's the reason the budget warning exists. The human dimension of this patrol is easy to overlook in the arithmetic. USS Gravely's crew numbers, approximately 280 officers and enlisted sailors. They have been at sea for 21 days. Their working day doesn't stop at night. In threat-elevated waters, the Combat Information Center runs a 24-hour watch rotation. The ship's air defense teams are at heightened readiness around the clock. The MH-60R Seahawk crew flies patrols in heat and humidity that puts severe stress on both the aircraft and its operators. The ship's engineering department maintains 4 gas turbine engines in an environment where failure is not an option. Put yourself in the position of a junior officer standing the midnight watch in the Combat Information Center of an Arleigh Burke destroyer in the Gulf of Oman. The radar picture shows 4 contacts, 2 commercial vessels, 1 unidentified small surface contact, and an air track that appeared on scope 40 seconds ago bearing northeast, altitude 50 feet, speed 185 knots. That profile is consistent with a Shahed 136. You have roughly 90 seconds to assess, query, and recommend engagement before the track is inside minimum intercept range. Your commanding officer is on the line, your SM-6 is on the rail, and somewhere in the back of your mind is the knowledge that if you fire and the track turns out to be a commercial drone or a misidentified aircraft, the political consequences will cascade for months. This isn't a hypothetical. It's a description of conditions that the crews of American destroyers have been operating under in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Oman since late 2023, when Houthi forces in Yemen, armed with Urgisi-supplied weapons and targeting data, began their campaign against commercial shipping in support of Iran's broader regional pressure strategy. USS Carney, USS Mason, USS Laboon. These ships have fired real interceptors against real threats in time, Under exactly these decision windows, the crews are performing, the ships are performing. The question is whether the institution can afford to keep performing at this pace. The budget problem has a specific shape. The Navy's operations and maintenance account funds everything from fuel and spare parts to training and base support. In a normal fiscal year, it's calibrated to support a deployment tempo that cycles ships through roughly 7-month deployments with adequate maintenance periods between them. What the current Gulf posture has created isn't a 7-month deployment for any individual hull, but a sustained, persistent presence that requires continuous rotation, meaning that as one destroyer comes off station, another goes on. The aggregate demand on the operations account never decreases. It just transfers from one hull to the next. Defense budget analysts who track these accounts, people like Todd Harrison at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or the analysts at the Congressional Budget Office who score Navy readiness requests, have noted for several years that the Navy's operations account has been structurally underfunded relative to the pace of operations the service is actually conducting. The gap was manageable when operations were episodic. The current Gulf posture has made them continuous. The warning that funds could run short by July 2026 is in this context not a surprise. It's the predictable consequence of a deterrence posture that was designed for a strategic environment where the threat was intermittent, applied against an adversary that has learned to make the threat constant. Here's the take that will probably get pushback. The budget shortfall isn't primarily a resourcing failure. It's a strategy failure. The United States built a deterrence architecture around the proposition that American presence would be so costly to challenge that adversaries wouldn't bother. What Iran, and by extension the RG and its proxies, figured out is that you don't have to challenge American presence directly. You challenge it financially. You make the act of being present more expensive than the political will to sustain it. And you do that not with a decisive engagement, but with 1,000 cheap engagements that each look individually too small to justify a major strategic response. This is, incidentally, exactly the logic that Ali Khamenei articulated in a 2019 speech that received relatively little coverage in the Western press. The Supreme Leader didn't predict a conventional military confrontation with the United States. He described a strategy of economic and operational attrition, making American presence in the region so persistently expensive that it would eventually become politically unsustainable in Washington. The budget warning of 2026 suggests that strategy is, at minimum, having a measurable effect. Now consider the options that Donald Trump's administration actually has. Option 1. Maintain the current posture, accept the burn rate, and go to Congress for a supplemental appropriations package to cover the shortfall. This is the path of least operational disruption. It keeps the cordon intact, keeps the signal of American commitment legible, and avoids the optics of drawing down under financial pressure. The downside is political. Asking Congress for emergency defense funds in mid-2026 in a budget environment that is already contested will generate scrutiny, debate, and delay, and it validates at least implicitly that the deterrence posture is costing more than projected. Option 2. Reduce the forward presence. Pull 1 or 2 destroyers off station, thin the cordon, reduce the patrol tempo. This conserves operations funding and brings the burn rate back within budget. The risk is signal. Any reduction in American naval presence in the Gulf of Oman will be read by URG-C planners, by Houthi commanders, by Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian's government, and by Gulf partner states as a retreat. Not necessarily a strategic retreat, but a visible one. In deterrence terms, visibility is the product. Reducing visibility to save money is reducing the deterrent itself. Option 3. Shift the cost structure. Rather than intercepting Shahed drones with SM-6 missiles, invest in lower-cost effectors, directed energy weapons, electronic warfare systems, shorter-range interceptors that reduce the per-engagement cost. The Navy has been pursuing this for years. The USS Preble underwent modifications to test high-energy laser systems. The optical dazzling interdictor Navy variant has been tested at sea. But these systems aren't yet deployed at scale. Their effectiveness against saturation attacks remains unproven in operational conditions, and the timeline for fielding them across the Arleigh Burke fleet runs into years, not months. The July 2026 budget problem doesn't have a directed energy solution. It has a fiscal and strategic solution, and neither is clean. What's most surprising about this situation, when you trace the logic back, is not that a superpower is running short on operating funds. It's that the mechanism by which it's running short is so mundane. There's no decisive engagement driving the cost. There's no dramatic escalation consuming resources at a visible rate. There's just the daily, hourly, minute-by-minute burn of engines turning, radars spinning, crews watching, Interceptors sitting on their rails waiting to be fired at something that costs 40 times less to launch than to stop. Strategic theorists call this exhaustion by attrition. The accountants call it an operations and maintenance overrun. The sailors on watch in the Combat Information Center of USS Gravely at 3 in the morning call it Tuesday. Here's what's actually being contested in the Gulf of Oman right now. Not territory. Not sea lanes in an immediate tactical sense. The lanes are still open, tankers are still moving, oil is still flowing. What's being contested is the cost equation of American commitment. The Urji's strategy, as Esmail Khani and his predecessors have articulated it, is to make the price of American presence in the region continuously visible and continuously rising, until the domestic political math in Washington tips against sustaining it. The Navy's budget warning is the first measurable evidence that the strategy is working at some level. Not winning. The United States hasn't withdrawn, the cordon hasn't collapsed, the signal of commitment hasn't been revoked. But the cost is now legible in a way it wasn't 3 years ago. The operational account is under pressure. The interceptor magazines are being consumed. The rotation schedule is straining crews and maintenance pipelines. Benjamin Netanyahu's government in Israel is watching this closely because an American naval presence that is financially strained is an American deterrent that has to be husbanded more carefully, which affects the calculus around Iran's nuclear program and any potential future action. Gulf partner states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, which host the 5th Fleet headquarters, are watching it because their own security architectures assume a permanent, robust American naval presence. If that presence begins to thin for budget reasons, the assumptions underlying their defense planning start to shift. The most straightforward version of this problem is simple. The United States built its Gulf deterrence posture on the assumption that it could afford to be present indefinitely, and that the cost of challenging that presence would be prohibitive for any adversary. The first assumption is now qualified. The second has been systematically eroded by the drone. The Navy isn't losing the military equation, it's losing the financial one, slowly, by the hour, at a rate of 700,000 to 1,000 per hull per week. One destroyer, 21 days. Somewhere between $2 and $3 million just to exist in the water. One Shahed drone intercepted, $2.1 million for the SSM-2s that stopped it against $35. Zero for the drone. The tanker it was protecting waited at anchor for 2 days before transiting safely, at a cost of roughly $14,000 in port fees. The math doesn't resolve cleanly into a winner or a loser. It resolves into a question. The Navy's answer to that question, historically, has been that the cost of presence is the cost of the international order, that free navigation in the Gulf of Oman is not just about any individual cargo manifest, but about the entire architecture of global trade and American credibility. That answer is still defensible, but it's getting more expensive to defend by the day, and the July deadline is when the arithmetic stops being abstract and starts being a line item in a congressional hearing. Here's the real question this patrol raises, and we're genuinely curious what you think. When deterrence is measured in dollars per hour, and the thing you're deterring costs almost nothing to attempt again, is presence still a strategy? Or has it become a subscription that your adversary is quietly billing you for? Tell us in the comments. 2 reads on this one. Team presence. The cost is the cost and you pay it. Or team recalibrate. The exchange ratio has broken the model and the strategy needs to change. Pick a side. We read every comment, and the next video traces where the money actually goes. From the 5th Fleet budget, to the defense contractors, to the congressional votes that decide whether the cordon holds.